Fallout Equestria Child of the Stars Chapter 8, Part 8. The platform gave another whir, with water pouring from its surface as it began to swiftly ascend into the tunnel. The sound of alarms stopped as it did so, as did the deluge, and the dusty scent of the wasteland drifted down from the open tunnel. After what I'd been through down here, I was almost glad for that familiarly awful smell, if only I'd not been stuck in the middle of a fight. The cage of raiders swung open violently, Cherry's eyes winded as she turned, only to see a group of ponies no different from those which had tortured her charging right towards her. Without hesitation, I forced my magic back around my weapon and swung it around to face towards the new threat. In a flash of light, two were reduced to ash and another was crippled and sent skidding across the soaked metal. Three were still able to run, one towards Cherry. I tried to force myself up, but my wounded foreleg slipped out from under me, burning with pain as it struck onto the wet floor.
"Cherry, look out!"
I cried out in panicked terror as she staggered back timidly, raising Zap Zap and firing two of its shots blindly into the charging raider. The first one glanced his left forehoof. The second one melted a hole into his chest. His lifeless corpse slid into a bloody halt at her hooves, convulsing violently. My anger flared as I realized what I was forcing her to do again. I was supposed to save her, and the weight of the other pony over me stole my attention.
"Why, ain't you just fucking delicious?"
My attacker, a far larger mare with a grisly expression and spiked mane, hissed around the shaped metal protruding from her muzzle. Goddesses only knew where she'd been keeping that weapon while all locked up. I fought to bring my weapon round to blast her, but she bucked it from my grip, while her forehooves pushed down onto my chest and one of her rear legs thrusted forwards and pinned my dragonclaw knife in its sheath. I thrashed about, splashing in the water like a beached fish as I tried to break free, and the larger mare merely smiled cruelly.
"Oh, and where do you think you're going, little pony?"
she asked cruelly, lowering her rusty blade to my throat. I stopped thrashing and instead forced my horn to flare once more.
"Fuck you!"
I screamed as one of my twin plasma rifles elevated up behind her. Fearing a shot would go right through her skull and into my own, I instead swung the hard end round with all of my telekinetic strength striking the back of her head. More of the gun gave way than her skull did, since energy weapons were never really as, well, solidly constructed as their leading flinging counterparts, but it was enough to get her off of me. She gave a painful squeal, staggering back. Almost instinctively, I rolled aside, firing two bolts of plasma into her right flank, turning her rear and spiked collar cutie mark into a luminescent green sludge. Just before me, I saw the saddle blaster laying onto the wet platform. Beyond it, a third raider mare jumped onto the buck with a black barding and battle saddle. The pair thrashed about, the latter trying to force the mare off as she tried to ram a hammer into his skull. I raised the plasma rifle and sent 3 bolts of luminescent green death into her side. The grizzled mess of a pony gave a horrific screech, but not before slamming her hammer flat onto the buck's face, reducing it to not more than just bloody offal with a single, bone-crushing blow. Blood stained the watery surface as I fired once more, the spark cell of the rifle depleted. Even so, the third shot was enough to take off most of her head and sent the half-dead pair staggering towards the edge of the platform, where they tumbled clumsily over the rail. Above, the dull sky of the wasteland was slowly shedding light onto the platform. I staggered to my hooves, limply holding my crippled limb up from the slippery metal. My insides felt like a thunderstorm of surging nausea, sharp lancing pain, and shock-fueled convulsions, all of which were driving me to keel over and vomit up my guts. A moment later, and that's exactly what I did, staggering to my knees as my weapon fell over to the wet metal at my side. A foul taste of bile greeted my tongue, and a sputtering gagging followed as the dull sunlight shimmered over the wet platform.
"Dragonfire!"
Cherry cried. All of a sudden, a sharp zap lanced over my head, striking the yellow mare who'd shot me first back to the ground.
"Cherry! Cherry, stop!"
I coughed instinctively, staggering to my hooves. Cherry froze instantly, her eyes falling to the wet floor, her mouth quivering.
"Shit. Dragon, what did you just do? You dragged her into that, and now..."
I shoved my self-re-incriminating thought away in a desperate attempt to hold off the inevitable turmoil. Then, my attention shifted as the platform ground to a rough halt. The dreary cloud cover hung over me once again, and around us was the shattered remnants of some sort of pre-war warehouse. It was nothing now more than ruined walls and a collapsed roof containing several Destiny Core crates. Surrounding it was the remains of a mesh fence, mostly torn down and buried beneath the desert sand. Swallowing the foul taste of vomit best I could, and fighting not to gag as my insides lurched, my attention moved to the mare I just spared from Zap Zap's cruel sting. She was curled up tightly, shivering and drenched. She mumbled incoherently as she clutched her missing ear with a severely burned forehoof. Both water and blood caked her quivering face as she stared hopelessly up at me. Retrieving the saddle blaster from the crimson-stained pool I had just fallen in, I staggered over to her. I'd hesitated to shoot her. Why did I hesitate? These ponies were red, not friendly, so why the fuck did I hesitate?
Go on. Just do it. Just do it. At least, life shall become transcendent now anyways.
The mare whimpered. My expression tightened.
Who are you?
I demanded, pressing the glowing barrel of my rifle to her face. She shivered timidly, glaring up at the length of the weapon with dull, tear-filled eyes.
You're them, aren't you? The meddlers, you're the reason the Sigil sent Baron and all of his freaks to kill us all off. The Sigil sent them because of you, so fuck you. I thought I had something, but you gotta go and ruin everything.
She coughed heavily. My ears flattened. I had no idea who or what the fuck she was talking about. All of this stuff, what was it?
Why couldn't the Wasteland simply just try to kill me? I really didn't have time for all this cryptic shit.
Regardless, I twirled my gun around into the air.
Next time, I suggest that you don't shoot me,
I growled before slamming the metal stock into her head, knocking her out cold.
Or you'll become very well acquainted with the other end of my gun!
I yelled at the unconscious mare and then took a deep, calming breath. The relatively fresh air cleared my throat of the acidic taste of bile before I turned back to Cherry. The moment I looked at her, the emotional floodgates, they opened. I'd forced her to do all of that, only to tear her down in one sentence. I didn't know why I told her to stop, why I hesitated in the first place. I holstered weapons as I took my step forward, almost stumbling onto my crippled foreleg.
I'm sorry,
I told her with a weak kindness. She glanced up at me before her head looked away towards her right, and I stammered, my tongue catching in my foul-tasting throat.
It's okay. It's okay.
She whimpered softly. I reached out to her before dragging my hoof back and forcing any response back into my muzzle.
Damn it, Dragonfire, it was not okay. That's just her default response to everything. But what was there to say?
I mentally shelved that thought, deciding to just deal with it later. We still had to find Star and get back to Churn, and only then I could sort her out. The only problem then would be me. As much as I was trying to ignore the feeling, Overseer had done something to me, and there was no point in going anywhere if whatever he had done to me meant that I was as good as dead. I paused. I needed to see a doctor. Luckily, there was at least one between here and home, even though that strangely didn't really make me feel any better. My thoughts ground to a halt. I needed to find Star, or at least contact him, but he had the broadcaster. Checking my pip-buck didn't really offer me any hope either, as my ears sank and I discovered that he was either out of range of the receiver, or something else was preventing his broadcaster from broadcasting and receiving signals from my pip-buck. I looked up for a moment, only to see Cherry standing upwards at something, and I followed her gaze. My eyes found themselves directly towards a heart-stopping sight. Above the ruined warehouse walls rose a great plume of dark smoke. A coal-black column scarred the sky almost as high as the cloud cover as it rolled away on an easterly wind. I bolted, running towards the warehouse's ruined wall until finding a traversable breach at its lowest point. I found myself onto the ridgeline overlooking the wall parking area of the Destiny Core Tower, and a few moments later, just then, my gaze descended upon the searing flames mess the glass building's lower levels had become. I almost felt my heart stop in my chest, a weight pulling me to the ground akin of that of an avalanche over my back. I gasped, smoky air filling my lungs as I staggered to the dirt. Fuck, goddesses, damn it, we should have never split up. If we hadn't, then this all would have been fine. Cherry wouldn't have been traumatized, I wouldn't have been some pony's experiment. That feeling of cold dread swiftly gave way to anger. This was my fucking fault. But Star, he'd been fine, right? I mean, this wasn't the first time we'd been separated on a job. I mean, only this time, there was an evil corporation, a mad robot, and a crazy, raging demonic pony to consider. God, something was going on here, or something had been going on in this place long before we were even drawn into it. Was it really all worth the caps? The 50,000? It was within my reach, yet it seemed further away than ever. Had I even gotten the data the client asked for, what else had I gained? An emotionally traumatized companion? An increasingly fucked up body? And a slowly growing desire to know who the fuck sent us here in the first place. Whoever it was knew how much it was worth. Why else would he or she or they offer so much? Probably because they knew what other powerful interests they were after, or whatever they were. My mind added, flashing images of the red, flaming buck from below. I face-toved.
How the fuck could I have been so stupid?
I knew it was dangerous from the moment I agreed to do it, and yet I just still trotted on in there and practically served myself up. As for Star, well, I refused to admit that the buck was still in the burning building, no matter how much grief my mind threw my way. Star was strong, and I'd think of a way to find him. I hope. Regardless, I raised my hooves. I'd been over this with myself at least once before. It was just like the last time I thought I'd lost Star. Like I said, I didn't really love him. I'd killed that flower before it could even blossom. No, I was a smart pony. Below, in the walled-off parking lot, I could see yet more raider ponies, several of them gunned down, and the others snapping at each other like feral ghouls. Atop the winding stairs, several of the black-armored ponies seemed to be bowing to the inferno and keeping it going with several flamethrowers. All the while, two of them kept a keen eye onto the angry rabble of the wreckage-strewn asphalt. As I watched, I heard Cherry drag herself up beside me, her hooves trailing lazily through the dust as she looked up at the rising stack of black smoke hopelessly. I could sense similar feelings radiating off of her for different reasons. I wanted her to ask me something, be the curious little mare I'd seen open that medical box or smash the display cabinets. I was just afraid that the wasteland had cut that out of her, or even worse, that I had cut that out of her. I stepped back from the ridge, knowing that the small, seemingly insignificant sentence I'd uttered almost instinctively could completely bring her down. For what? To spare the life of a mare who'd try to kill us? I highly doubted that she'd be alive when Carnage found her, and still, I'd left her there to face his wrath. I killed that thought quickly, though. I killed monsters. That was okay. Monster or not, I had no obligation to save her from the ponies she was working for. I looked at Cherry, only for a brief moment before turning my gaze to the desert. The wide-open sands blurred like a dusty haze onto the horizon as winds whipped up the dust bowl from the west.
Come on. We need to put some distance between us and the place before nightfall,
I suggested dryly before limping my way down the hill. She didn't really argue, and once again, her hoofsteps fell in line behind my own. Footnote: level up. New perk added: Secrets of Spelunking. Who knows what that goddess's forsaken place did to you, but at least now you can safely say you know better. You gain +1 perception, and chances to find rare items are increased by 5% whenever in any dungeons. Active effect added: Guinea Pig. Like it or not, you've made a big mistake and now have to live with the fact that you may just boil away and melt at any time. You suffer -1 to both strength and endurance.